So hello everyone, welcome to Global Impact, the show that connects the dots so that you don't have to. I'm sharing the microphone today with my dear co-host, Melissa Ritchie. Hi Melissa, how are you?
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Pretty good, all things considered.
What's the situation, Michael, in Ukraine? Where are you, first of all, and what's going
Yeah,
on?
yeah. Well, we're lucky to be having this conversation because the internet has been pretty shaky today for the first time. So I'm in Lviv, Ukraine, a very historic city on Ukraine's western border with Poland. And this is normally a beautiful, well, it is still a beautiful city. It hasn't been hit yet by the crisis, but or by the violence rather, but it's kind of like an open air museum. It's very historic, lots of old churches, castles and buildings, lots of different faiths here too. It's Ukraine's one of Ukraine's most precious tourism hubs, but it's also a place of patriotism, of learning. A lot of Ukraine's leaders in business, politics, a lot of the leaders came from here. So it's viewed as a very, very important place. And this is also the place, for example, where my parents came from. They were born, a short drive away from here.
Mhm.
And the Ukrainian diaspora, most of their roots actually are here in the western part of Ukraine. So it has huge importance to the millions of Ukrainian diaspora overseas. But what's happening right now is it's turning more and more into a city under siege.
Right.
We're seeing today for the very first time a lot more internally displaced people fleeing. Those who want to stay in Ukraine and can afford it, because it's not cheap here necessarily, have come here. And they're going to try and ride out the conflict here
So I sorry to
before they try to
interrupt.
make it to the border.
Sorry to interrupt, but would you like to update us on the situation actually? Because you were prior actually going to leave, you were in Kiev, right? Or where were you? And so
Right.
what
So I
happened
came
there?
first. Sure. So
Yeah.
I came first to Kiev, and I
Yeah.
was there for about 2 weeks or so.
Okay.
The idea was to stay there. I actually moderated a panel there on the growing tension.
Hmm.
But then what happened is things started to escalate. It did look like Mr. Putin would decide to invade Ukraine, and indeed, shortly after I came here, that started to happen. Um, and so it came to a point where I and others who were here, who were normally in Kiev, could not go back there. And at the moment, sad to say, the violence has got so bad in Kiev. There's been bloodshed, buildings targeted by Russian missiles.
Mm.
Kharkiv, the second biggest city in Ukraine, is even worse. Today, a key government building was targeted with a missile, lots of bloodshed and destruction there.
Yeah.
And just a few hours ago, the main TV tower in Kiev was targeted by a Russian missile. It was blowing up, knocking TV channels off the air. But it's also very close to Baba Yar, the mass grave of Jews who the
Mm.
Nazis exterminated. So you can imagine the worldwide anger at that.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to be talking to a guest who's going to talk to us about negotiation and peace talks, but there were peace talks attempted the other day, a couple of days ago, hosted by Belarus between the Russians and Ukrainians. And they lasted several hours, but during those talks, the Russians resumed fighting. So
Yeah.
they agreed to come back to negotiation table, but as I said on one of the broadcasts, I think it was BBC Persian, is I think things have got to a situation where maybe the UN or with the United States backing some kind of prominent peace envoy on the level of Mr. Clinton or a former U.S. president
Hmm.
needs to be deployed to the region to
Right.
do that kind of shuttle diplomacy.
Yeah.
Um, because it looks like at the moment there's reportedly a column of several dozen kilometers of Russian armored vehicles heading towards Kiev.
Yeah.
It looks like a full-blown assault right now.
Right. How are you feeling personally? I'm sure a lot
Well,
of
thanks for
our audience want
asking.
to know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Even though I've worked in a lot of complex emergencies and conflicts, I was 2.5 years in East Jerusalem with UNICEF and witnessed unspeakable bloodshed there and violence. This one's different. I've been here for almost a month now. There's a lot of anxiety. And I think it's part of it is because my personal roots do go back here. This is a country that I've worked in, I've lived in, a country I love. It's like a second home to me.
Yeah.
And to have my friends calling me from places like Kiev and saying, "Can you help me? We're stranded here," or we're running out of food. It's heartbreaking. I see every day walking around here in Lviv, families almost walking around aimlessly. They don't know what to do, whether to stay here or make that dash to the border to Poland and
Is
cross
that
over
safe? Is that
and
safe?
an uncertain life.
Is that safe?
No, right now it's a catastrophe, honestly speaking, at the border. We're hearing of waits of up to 40 hours, almost 2 days to cross. So it's cold now, especially at night.
Yeah.
There's little shelter there. So it's actually getting dangerous to make that crossing. And I'm hoping that some kind of humanitarian corridor could be open to make it easier for people. One of the factors, Melissa, is that under this kind of martial law protocol, Ukrainian men between the ages of 18 and 55 or 58 or something, they're banned from leaving the country. So imagine, you're a young family, you want to leave the violence, you get to the border and you turn back. The family, the wife, sorry, the mother and kids can go, but the husband can't.
Yeah.
So
the
that creates such a dilemma. Yeah,
families are
for a lot of
separated, right? But a lot of
right.
It's surprising, but a lot of women, and there was a story of a grandmother who stayed and was fighting in Kiev. She actually learned how to shoot, and there's a whole article about it, and it was heartbreaking and it's such an inspiration at the same time, this spirit, and there was also this lady who was a World War II a survivor. And she said, "I survived the World War II. I will survive that one. I'm staying." Yeah. And all this spirit, this Ukrainian spirit, it's beautiful to see. And
we're seeing that all over. We're all over. And sorry to interrupt. And just I think it was yesterday, President Zelensky made an appeal to anybody from overseas who wants to come here and fight. The spirit of the Ukrainian people has been beyond words. I talked to a young couple the other day walking alongside me. And they said, they were on their way to a hub to learn how to make Molotov cocktails in case the Russians make it this far. So they can blow up tanks. The government has handed out thousands and thousands of weapons to ordinary people who are basically civilians guarding, the streets and so on. So most Ukrainians tell me they will fight to the end. They are not going anywhere. They will fight and defend their country. It's been really amazing, inspiring.
It's inspirational, and really, I think it's uniting the world, watching them so brave and just fighting for what they believe in, their country, their everything, their children. And I just want to make sure that we talk about that too, because there's inspiration there as well, as much as there's pain. But what we want mostly is that you're safe, Michael, because
thank you.
Global Impact cannot go on without you. So please.
And I think, thank you, Melissa. And I think too, what helps me cope is that I'm blessed with a platform. I'm talking to a world audience every day, sometimes a few times a day. And I've noticed this previously when I was a spokesperson is, you can see, of course, a lot of horror and destruction, whether it's man-made or whether it's from an earthquake. But you feel you're playing such an important role by telling the world what's happening, by giving things context, that sort of thing. So I'm just amazed by and thankful for all the feedback I'm getting from people like you, from Pretty, from all of my friends around the world who are saying, we're watching you, we're listening to you, please continue to do it. So that helps keep me pretty level. Of course, we're feeling anxiety. Those air raid sirens go off sometimes a few times a day. You have to, I said the other day on CNN that when you go visit someone here now, one of the first items of business is to be shown where the bomb shelter is. That's just the way things are right now, in case there is a missile attack or something. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think it's time to actually introduce our guest. Would you like to introduce?
Kick us off there. Yeah, so today we're very pleased to have a gentleman by the name of William Ury. He is someone that, because of your and mine busy schedules and his, we've been, I think, in the process of almost a year trying to get our schedules aligned, and we finally did it. Finally did it, and a lot of people will recognize his name because he's a award celebrated negotiator. He served for the past 35 years as a negotiation advisor in mediator in many international high profile conflicts. He's the recipient of the Whitney North Seymour Award from the American Arbitration Association. He also received the Distinguished Service Medal from no less than the Russian Parliament for his work on resolution of ethnic conflicts. He also received the 2012 Peacemaker Award from Mediation Beyond Borders. William co-founded the Harvard Program on Negotiation and additionally helped find the International Negotiation Network with former President Jimmy Carter, who worked to end civil wars around the world, as most of you know. He's also the best-selling author of many books, most notably Getting to Yes. He co-authored Roger Fisher, which set out the method of, sorry, let me do that again. William Ury is also the best-selling author of many books, most notably Getting to Yes, which he co-authored with Roger Fisher. It set out the kind of method of principled negotiations. He's also worked as negotiation advisor and mediator in conflicts in the Middle East, the Balkans, the former Soviet Union, Indonesia, Yugoslavia, Chechnya, and
Everywhere.
Venezuela, among other countries. Yeah, very well-traveled and, going to many dangerous places to help prevent conflict from spiraling even further. In the 1980s, William also acted as consultant to the Crisis Management Center at the White House, working to create nuclear risk reduction centers in Washington and Moscow, which were the subject of first arms control agreements signed by President Ronald Reagan and General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev. So it goes without saying that William is a man of many, many accomplishments, and we will post his full bio as we usually do under the video. But this past experience with the ex-USSR and expertise on negotiations make him truly the perfectly timed guest to have right now, because we're going to be talking a lot, right, Melissa, about the current war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yes. And oh, well, here it is. He is here. Hi, William Ury, and welcome to Global Impact. Thank you so much for saying yes to be part of the show. So we're going to actually dive in straight. I know that, we don't have much time. Michael is in Ukraine right now, and his internet might be cut down any minute. We don't know. So we're going to tackle straight the problems here. And before that, I have a question for you. How did you get into the field of negotiation, mediation, and why?
Good question. When I was a boy, I moved from the United States to Europe, to Switzerland, and my childhood there. And still in the time when you could feel World War II, you could even World War I. It was very kind of present, and there was every expectation that there would be World War III. Even every building in Switzerland has a bomb shelter, or at least at that time had a nuclear bomb shelter. And I could never understand why, what was it that was so important that was worth risking the fate of humanity? So I made that my life question, really. And I became an anthropologist to try to understand this tribe, the human tribe, and how is it that we can deal with our differences without killing each other? So that became the question that I've guided myself since. So that's how I got into the field of negotiation and mediation.
And it all started in Switzerland?
It all started in Switzerland.
That's an interesting place, Switzerland, out of all the places. Wow.
Yeah, there's not many people indeed with your job description, but just picking up on what you said and bringing it to where we are now, you must be shaking your head, William, to think that in 2020, problems are being solved essentially with gunpowder, with lots of weaponry right now to solve a problem between, for example, Russia and Ukraine and the West.
It is. Yeah, it's very sad. It's really sad. And it's sad because it's so unnecessary. You know, there are much better ways to deal with our differences than war. And in fact, as we're currently seeing right now in Ukraine, people think they have this old mentality. They think they can win wars. The truth is, you can win a battle, but you can only lose a war in terms of the long term. In the long term, everyone's going to lose. Obviously, the Ukrainians will lose most of all, but the Russians will lose big time. The West will lose big time. Everyone loses from war. The whole world loses. And there are so much better ways to deal with our differences so that actually everyone can benefit. And, the European community is a good example of having learned from World War II, and World War I. Let's try to create common prosperity, common security. And that's the lesson we're being called upon to learn once again, the hard way right now with what's going on right now between Russia, Ukraine, and the West.
Now, as you know, there were negotiations, I think it was 2 days ago, and wartime, your concept of time was really mixed up, but I think it was a couple of days ago where the Ukrainians were across the table from the Russians, hosted by Belarus. And my mind went back, I think you were in Venezuela, it was around Christmas time, and you were in a tough situation there, and you got the then president to, make a kind of turn and make things a little bit better temporarily for everybody. I'm wondering if you were kind of in the background here and you were looking at the way the talks went. They didn't even finish those talks and the ceasefire was already being violated. The city of Kharkiv was being bombed. If you were kind of guiding those negotiations, was there anything you would have done differently, perhaps?
I don't want to judge the negotiators because I don't know enough, but just generally what I would say is this: first of all, you're not going to take an issue like this and settle it in a few hours in a day. And the pattern in the wars I've been in, and I've been in many, many different war zones over the last 45 years, is, you open a negotiation, there's often fire going during the negotiation, ceasefires are made, ceasefires are broken. It's not like it's not like everything can be settled in a weekend. I mean, if let's say you had a difficult marriage and I said to you, it was a really difficult marriage. And I said, look, you'll go away for the weekend and you'll come back and everything will be fine. You'd laugh at me. And this is 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times more complicated. So it takes time, but it was a beginning. It's a beginning, and we'll have to see. They did agree to meet again, and that's often the success of the first meeting, is agreeing to meet again. These issues are so deep-rooted and they're so complex, and they're governed by deeper layers of trauma, historical trauma. I mean, Ukraine, it's the land of trauma. I mean, it's like,
indeed.
I mean, just go back a century, World War I, then the Holodomor, and the Great Famine, and then World War II, and it's just, it's endless. So it's and Russia generally too. So it's like, and trauma, when people are in trauma, Putin, for example, he was born out of trauma. I mean, he grew up in Leningrad, and the siege of Leningrad, 1 million people died. I mean, the siege of Leningrad, his brother died. His mother was tossed onto a pile of corpses, left for dead, and only someone heard her crying and they pulled her out. Wow. So you can imagine. So when you have that kind of thing, your mentality often is, the only thing is safety and force to, and then, so it's like, you can start to understand the psychology that leads to very erroneous decisions, like deciding to this terrible, tragic mistake of invading Ukraine.
Yeah, before I pass the mic back to Melissa, quick question. Up until the last minute, it seemed neither the West or even the Ukrainian people themselves, even Mr. Zelensky, were downplaying the threat of war. A lot of Ukrainians, I met Kiev before coming here, said, no way, it's not going to happen. Were you surprised by that kind of mentality that everyone seemed to underestimate that a war could really happen?
You know, the thing is that when you live like you're in Ukraine, you've lived with war since 2014. You know, there have been thousands and thousands of dead. You've lived with the fear of Russia, and people have to get on with their lives. I know, like in the Middle East, when you go and there's something like that, you know, people get inured to it, and they basically adopt a psychology of, I'll believe it when I see it, you know? And, you know, because otherwise you have to live your life constantly in high tension. So there's a little bit of creative denial just to get along, live your life. And they've had so many false alarms. So, and the truth is, no one knew that, that Putin was going to invade, for sure, except him and maybe a few people around him. Even, I mean, because I saw reports that the Russian soldiers, you know, being captured there in Ukraine, I'm thinking, we just were going on a training mission. What a minute. And the Russian people were being told, we're not going to invade Ukraine. So, you know, what exactly was going on? And there were many ways, you know, it could have happened, you know, maybe it could have just been around the Donbass and a little bit of expansion there, or along the sea between the Crimea and the Donbass. But this, an a full out invasion of Ukraine, many people thought that'd be crazy because, you know, you're going to, I mean, we just had the example of Afghanistan, the Americans, and before that, the Soviets, and the example of Iraq. And, you know, and Ukraine's a country of 40 million people. And if people resist, you know, you can maybe conquer it, but you can't hold it. Not, you know, not in today's world. So you know, I think Putin, I mean, I don't know exactly, but I can only imagine that isolated by COVID, you know, he's been 22 years in power. He, you know, for him, this was a geopolitical catastrophe of immense dimensions. And he thought this might be his legacy. And this might go a little bit like Crimea, where it was quick and, you know, fairly bloodless, and the world reacted, but then, and maybe he thought, maybe he deluded himself into thinking the same thing would happen here, but it's clearly a very different picture. And the truth is, everyone loses the war. He can't win this war. He's already lost. He may win the battle, you know, he's got superior force, but he's going to lose this war. And the consequences for him, for Russia, above all for Ukraine, for the West, for the world are incalculable. And because where is this going to lead? You know, how do we get out of this?
Yeah, but do you think this turn of events could have been prevented? Considering a lot of people around me are saying that his move the timing was perfect, because there's been a lot of in politics with the world leader, they've been very soft and they've made many mistakes. Like you were mentioning Afghanistan, you know, the exits and the fiasco. And there's been so many political fiascos that Putin could have actually found his way in. He's trying to do a checkmate. And do you think that if people stopped for a second and paid more attention, this whole situation could have been stopped in time?
I do believe that.
Okay.
And the first place it could have been prevented is at the end of the Cold War. The end of the Cold War in the 90s, I worked on the Cold War. I was as part of that process in the 80s of trying to work between the United States and Moscow. And I worked as an academic, but also as trying to think very practically about measures to prevent a nuclear war. And so the key Soviet experts I knew at the time, all of them, and the dean of them, George Kennan. George Kennan was the father of containment.
Yeah.
You know, he was the American diplomat who came up with the doctrine of containment, which was the strategy that eventually succeeded. And all of them said, do not expand NATO, because you'll take advantage of Russia when it's weak. And when Russia gets strong again, they will remember this. And George Kennan was like in his 90s at that point, and then like when the decision was made, and he warned, he gave a warning, a very strong warning. He said, if you do this, you will regret it. So it's very easy for us now to demonize Putin and demonize even the Russians and so on. But historically, if you're an historian, the original mistake was ours, was the West's, was triumphalism. When you're at, you know, it was the greatest miracle of my lifetime was practically the bloodless dissolution of the Soviet Empire. The whole world was threatened by the prospect of the Cold War. I was in Moscow in 1989 with the surviving participants of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Robert McNamara had been Secretary of Defense. McGeorge Bundy had been National Security Advisor. Andrei Gromyko had been Soviet Foreign Minister, the son of Khrushchev. All of those people together, and it was just trying to understand what happened there. We came so close to nuclear war like this. We were just so lucky. And it didn't just happen once, it happened many times. So it was a miracle that the Cold War came to an end, because when I was a student, the professor was saying the Berlin will be there forever. Berlin Wall will be there forever. The Cold War is going to go on for generations. And if you asked Soviet or Russian historians, just hypothetically, how many people would die if the Soviet Empire collapsed? You know, their lowest figure would be 5 million, 10 million, 20 million people, because they knew, they had as an example what happened when the Russian Empire collapsed. And it happened, so it was a miracle. And there was a huge opportunity there to incorporate Russia into the security architecture of Europe, economically, to do what happened at the end of World War II with Germany, to actually embrace, incorporate, integrate. And that opportunity was lost. In fact, we moved what the Russians regarded as a hostile military alliance to them, right to their borders, all the way, you know, and so prevention should have started there with a little bit of wisdom, listening to the wise people who told us what was going to happen.
Yeah. Wow, that was a very good answer. I think you basically answered 5 questions in one right now. But I have a specific question. I mean, I am in the US. You worked with Jimmy Carter, the President Jimmy Carter, back in the days. If today you were working with President Biden, what would you advise him? What would you say to him?
Well,
and it doesn't have to be, by the way, a solution or whatever, because, you know, we did say it was complicated, but an insight. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think President Biden has done, you know, a very good job of warning the world of Putin's intentions, because the way that he was hoping to do this was to do it so fast that people would be confused and whatever, and then Biden, by, you know, sharing intelligence, American intelligence, and by going and making it, he made that the central. All eyes were on Putin, and he was hoping that would stop Putin from carrying out his plan. But it prepared the world right now to respond appropriately. And you can see, I mean, it's quite astonishing to see the reaction of the world right now, and even the reaction within Russia. But it's like the world has come together with a unity that is surprising everyone. Europe, I mean, Germany, France, I mean, it's like, it's amazing to see what's happening. And that's what I call, to me, this is the key response to dealing with destructive conflict, is to activate the larger community. I call it the third side. You know, there's always like two parties in a conflict, Russia, Ukraine. There's the third side, which is the rest of us, all of us really. And it's our most ancient mechanism for dealing with conflict, which is to get the community to create a container within which even the most destructive conflict can gradually be stopped, interrupted, and slowly transformed into a more peaceful process of negotiation and dialogue and looking for resolution. So Biden right now, I think he's helped unify a response. He also made a really critical decision, which in my regard was clear. He made it super clear that the United States and the West were not going to intervene militarily in Ukraine.
And do you think
So he
that's,
said,
that's bad?
no, I think it's good.
Good.
I think
Why
it's
is
the right,
that?
well, because if the West were to intervene militarily in Ukraine, the chances of a nuclear war
Yeah.
that everyone would suffer from would be huge.
Okay.
So it's a hard decision to make because, you want to help, but it was the right decision to say, we're going to deal with this. We're going to use nonviolent economic sanctions of enormous magnitude. And then there's going to be help. There's going to be support, so the Ukrainians can defend themselves. To me, that's the right strategy.
So you think it's like damage control, basically, trying to.
It's like you're walking a razor's edge. You're walking a tightrope, right?
Right.
A tightrope, because you in a situation like this, the United States and Russia each have 5,000 to 6,000 nuclear weapons, which could incinerate the entire planet.
Yeah.
So
Understatement.
nothing is worth that, right? So you've got to be really, really careful. And so so the question is, how do you interrupt this? How do you contain it? And right now there's a lot of interruption going on. I think Mr. Putin must be realizing that his adventure, his special military operation is not going quite according to plan. And in fact, looks, like it's actually accomplishing the exact opposite. This is the thing. We are our own worst enemies. Just like the West, we were our own adversary when we humiliated, really, Russia. Clinton talked about this with Yeltsin. There were so many occasions when we unnecessarily humiliated Russia, and Russia was down, right? So that was our mistake. His biggest mistake is he thinks he was going to get more security, he would get more recognition of Russia as a great power. He thought and what has he got? He's got much less security. He's united Europe. He's got Germany, which was a pacifist country, to suddenly, social democrats to decide, that 2% of their budgets, and it could be enshrined in the Constitution as going to the military. I mean, he's unified Europe. He's got Sweden and Finland thinking about joining NATO. I mean, he's created his own nightmare. So, going back to the advice to Biden right now, I think he's put into place, the education of Putin that, war doesn't work. Now, that's what in negotiation language, we call that your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right? He's strengthened his BATNA now, and together with NATO and Europe and so on, and that's happening. Now, that's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is when you have your opponent and you're backing them into a corner, because right now Putin is feeling cornered. He's got these sanctions, he's got, he's back into a corner. You need to give them a way out. You need to, there was an ancient Chinese military strategist 2,500 years ago, Sun Tzu, who said, you must build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. Where's the golden bridge for Putin to retreat across now? To think about, okay, he must now be realizing that he's not going to get what he wants. He's actually got the opposite of what he wants. How do we give Russia a way out that allows the troops to leave Ukraine and for everyone to be better off? I mean, it seems impossible. It seems impossible, but I believe it actually is possible. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible. I can, as a negotiation, from a negotiation aspect, you can see that there are ways in which Ukraine would be better off, Russia would be better off, the West would be better off, the United States would be better off, everyone would be better off with other scenarios than the current scenario in which everyone is going to lose, right?
Yeah.
So the question, how do you get there? The Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres once said about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he said, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is there's light at the end of the tunnel. The bad news is there's no tunnel." And the truth is here, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to build that tunnel. We have to build the pathway to get to a Europe of common security, where all the nations, including Ukraine and Russia, have their sovereignty and security guaranteed.
Wow.
Wow, I can't wait to get this on air. Maybe this will get to the right ears. Maybe we should translate this whole thing into Russian as well and Ukrainian. A previous guest on the Global Impact, Michael Vatikiotis, him and I were talking about sanctions a few months ago. We were talking about Myanmar at the time, and his stance was that sanctions are often ineffective. There are more ways for Western leaders to pat themselves on the back and say, "I've done something." In this particular case, you may recall there was quite a debate between Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and the West, because Zelensky said, "No, we have to put sanctions in now, so Mr. Putin feels the bite." What's your stance on this? Should sanctions have been used more earlier as a deterrent, and do they still work these days?
Yes, it is a big debate. I work in a lot of conflicts where sanctions. I've worked North Korea right now. I'm working North Korea, Venezuela, everything about sanctions. The truth is, there's a little bit of a theology developing around sanctions, as if sanctions are an answer. Sanctions are just a means to an end. They have to be embedded in a much larger strategy. And sometimes people just reflexively put on sanctions, but the whole idea of sanctions is it's got to be focused, targeted, to try and persuade the other to do something or not to do something. In this case, it's usually not to do something, right? Not to invade in the first place, or in this case would be to leave. The trouble with sanctions, they're a very blunt weapon, is once you use them, then what? Then, they only work if you can withdraw them, right? I mean, it's like, if you just pour on more punishment, it doesn't, unless there's a door open through which someone can go, which goes back to the Golden Bridge. Sanctions only work, in fact, all that pressure only works if there's a place that the other side can go. Because, oddly enough, we think often we get into this mentality, which is in a conflict, which is our job is to make it more difficult for the other side. Our job is to make it harder for Putin. No, our job is to make it easier. We want to make it as easy as possible for Putin to make the right decision to withdraw his troops right now. So we have to make it easier for him to make the right decision. We have to do something which we hate to do, which is we have to listen. We have to put ourselves in his shoes. We have to practice what I would call strategic empathy. We have to understand his perspective. We have to think about how do we make it easier for him to do that? And that's where sanctions can play a role, but it's within the larger strategy. And it's not just, one sanction is not the same as another sanction. There can be targeted sanctions, for example, at individuals. I saw some interesting ideas being floated by someone that I know saying, it's like sanctions are like a stick, but where's the carrot, and then where's the way out? You need all of that together to make a persuasive approach to make it easier for the other side to do what you'd like them to do?
Well, some people believe that it might be a little bit too late, that Putin went too far already. I mean, how do you come back from a full-on invasion, killing children, bombing Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine? I mean, it's very emotional for a lot of people. And I'm putting myself in that position where it's very difficult for me at the moment to calm down and to look at the bigger picture, because I'm thinking here about the civilians, I'm thinking about the death. And I'm like, well, this person right now he went way too far. How do you come back from this?
It's exceedingly difficult, Melissa. Let me preface all this by saying,
Yeah.
this may sound simple, but it is the hardest work that human beings can do. There's no harder work than we can do.
Yeah.
It takes, and because, as you mentioned, people are suffering. You're seeing people being killed. It's just like, right now you want to put Putin on trial for war crimes. The last thing you want to do is negotiate with him, right?
Right.
And that's what happens in conflict, is we get reactive. And reactive in neuroscience. It's kind of the left feeling part of the brain that's governed by fear and pain that starts controlling us, right? Because we're trying to protect ourselves, right? That's the service of it. That's all good, except that part of the brain often makes us act in ways that go exactly contrary to our own interests. And I, as Gandhi once said, and we all go blind. And, when angry, you will make the best speech you will ever regret. And so the question is, what is best for us, and what is best for our children, and what is best for the future of Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
And what's beautiful about Mr. Zelensky is he's there. I've been watching some of his video thing. He's what I call, to me, to be an effective negotiator, you have to be on the balcony a little bit. It's like he's an actor, right? So there's a stage, right? There's a stage going on, and you're acting on the stage. But part of you is on a balcony overlooking that stage, where you can keep your eyes on the prize. What are you trying to achieve here? And that's what makes a good leader, is a leader, like Mandela, for example. Yeah. There was so much bloodshed and suffering in South Africa. He was able, even in prison, to go to the balcony, even writes about it in his autobiography, study himself, study his own mental processes, emotional processes. And you know what he did in prison? Even though he'd been beaten, his people were thinking, the first thing he did was he learned the language of his enemies, Afrikaans, so he could speak to them in their own language. He studied their history. He studied the history of their trauma, of their suffering in the Boer War. And then he was able to negotiate with them, knowing who they were, and was able to make it easier for them to leave power in South Africa, which they had all the power. He persuaded them to surrender their power. So it's that kind of leadership and thinking that we need. It's very understandable to be reactive, but it may not serve us or our children or our future or everything that we hold dear.
Wow.
That's an interesting point, because Mr. Zelensky, of course, speaks Russian as well as Ukrainian. And I've been watching his daily speeches, and oftentimes he'll switch to Russian and speak directly to the troops and say, go home, this isn't worth it. I'm going to be on NPR later after the State of the Union speech, and when they ask me what do I think I should be done, I'm going to say, I have the guy who I just spoke to. Mr. Biden should call him, put him on a plane to the Belarus-Ukrainian border and solve this problem in a few minutes. Not a few minutes, but.
No, anyway, yeah, go ahead, please.
Actually, if they did call you, would you go?
Of course I would go. That's my vocation in life. Because it's all about ultimately trying to stop the suffering that Melissa is talking about. I've seen so much unnecessary suffering, so much suffering. That's because, in war also, it's not just the soldiers who die, as you can see in Ukraine, it's the children who die, it's the women who die, it's the elderly who die, it's the innocent. In fact, in most wars these days, more innocents die than soldiers. And I'm not saying the soldiers are innocents in some sense too, but I'm just saying war, imagine what's going to happen right now, what could happen right now in Kiev. Kiev's, it's like, I've been to Kiev a couple of times. I went there, a few years ago to talk to the Ukrainian government about after the Crimean war, and the Kiev's such a beautiful city. It's the pearl. I mean, it's crazy for Putin because it's the origin of ancient Rus. It's the ancient of Russian civilization. It's where Vladimir received, Orthodoxy and Christianity, and but I worked in Syria, and you saw what happened in Syria to Aleppo and Homs and Idlib, and and the Russians, that those kind of tactics that they use in cities, or people use in cities. I mean, it's just it's hard to believe what could happen and why it's so important right now. Even though the anger, you just want to fight back, but if we could spare the thousands of lives who would be lost if Kyiv comes under siege and bombardment and artillery and apartment buildings and the Maidan, anything that could be done should be done.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing, the resilience of Ukrainians? I mean, I'm in awe with what I've seen so far. First of all, by President Zelensky, but also all those women who are there fighting and staying. And isn't that like, for me, that's an inspiration. That's what maybe we needed today with all the division in the world. I mean, that might be the positive, is that watching them fighting for their countries like that is such an inspiration. Oops, I just lost it. Are you still there?
No, I'm still here. And I could not agree more with you. I resonate with that. My heart goes out to all the Ukrainians, because it's like, what's happening is like these days, this is the first war I can remember. That's really a war where social media and where the whole world is paying like such minute-to-minute attention and feeling it in our, here in Colorado, anywhere. Like I'm getting messages from my friends in Brazil, and they're saying, are you watching? It's like everywhere in the world, people are feeling the pain and inspired by the courage of the Ukrainian people, the women, the men, children even. And in some way, everyone senses this is not just Ukraine. There's a global battle going on. And I was thinking yesterday on my walk, which was, what's the essence for the world in a global sense? To me, the essence is, are we going to deal with our deepest differences? Are we going to deal with it through force, through violence? Or are we going to deal with genuine power, which is the power that the Ukrainians are manifesting, which is the power of unity, the power of solidarity, the power of courage, the power. And that's it's force versus power. And force seems to win in the short term, but it can never win against power. And that's what I think we're going to see play out. Is even if all those Russian things go on, this battle, and that's what I think people are sensing is, oh, okay, there's something greater, which is the power of solidarity of the entire world, backing the power and solidarity of the Ukrainian people. And even the Russian soldiers will start to defect. There'll be things in Russia. There's a global drama going on here that's tragic and inspiring at the same time.
Yeah.
William, kind of to broaden out a bit, stepping away from Ukraine, again, referencing a previous guest, Janine Di Giovanni, she's a war correspondent, you might have heard of her. She said conflict has changed quite a bit in these modern times, two ways. One is they can appear very, very quickly overnight. One day you could have peace, the next day chaos. She also said, and this is echoed by many people, is that today's conflicts are not isolated. They could be in one certain part of the world, but reverberate around the globe very quickly. Do you agree with that? And why do you think that? So we're more interconnected, yes?
Yeah, it's well, the thing is, like, I have a friend who lives here. This is I'm in a real part of the color, who just sent me. He watched a fuzzy cell phone video of maybe Kharkiv, of you know, a rocket going into an apartment building there, and you know, and was just imagining, you know, the family that's living in there, and the children, and whatever, and you know, it's like it's happening next door. It's like it's happening to us. In fact, it is happening to us. So right now, you know, there's, you know, I mean, there's we live on this tiny little dot in the universe, and it's an increasingly interconnected world, and people are feeling it. I mean, it's amazing, because I've never seen this happen before. Like you know, like Brazil, people are, you know, it's not Carnaval in Brazil, and people are, you know, on the beaches, whatever. But I'm getting so many messages from friends in Brazil who are just glued to this situation. They're feeling it in their hearts empathetically. And so I do think that, and that's a good thing, because if the world can witness and stand up and pay attention to this, we can start to create a container, a social, emotional, political container within which the conflict can slowly be transformed. Let me give you an example. In 1989, just after I went to Moscow for that Cuban Missile Crisis conference, I went to Africa. And as an anthropologist, I was kind of curious. So how did our ancestors deal with conflict? So I was interested in hunters and gatherers, because we were, you know, our minds, everything is evolution. We evolved as hunters and gatherers for 99% of time. And there's almost no hunter-gatherer groups left, but there was a couple still in the Kalahari. So I went and spent a month in the desert there, and I was asking how they deal with conflict. And they have, in some sense, the same dilemma as we do with nuclear weapons, which is that every man has poison arrows that they use for hunting. And that if you just, it's like an injection, the person dies, but they take about 3 days to die. So if one man gets angry and shoots another man, that man will get up and shoot him back or shoot someone else. And in a small society, you lose 3-4 men, you lose most of your hunting capacity. And so it's like that, the poison arrow is the equivalent of an atomic bomb at that scale of society. So what do? When tempers start to rise, they listen, they hear about it, they feel it, and then someone goes and hides the poison arrows out in the desert. And then the whole community gets together around the campfire, the women, the men, the children, and they talk it out, and they listen, and they talk past each other, and whatever. It goes on for days, and at night they have dances where they call to the spirits for wisdom. And they don't rest until they not just find a solution to the problem, but until there's a reconciliation of the parties, because they know that unless the relationships are repaired, the conflict can break out again. And if tempers are too high, because there's been too much, the elders say, well, you go off and visit some relatives for 6 months in another waterhole. There's a cooling off. They have a whole system. What is it based on? It's based on what I call the third side, which is the power of the community. The parties could be powerful, but they're not more powerful than the whole community together, which is what Mr. Putin is finding out. Is he may be very powerful, but he's not more powerful than the whole world unifying and trying to help the Ukrainians in this particular resist an terrible invasion. So to me, the power of the third side is what is emerging here, and we need to think about how to create that container so that even the most difficult conflict, slowly tempers can calm. You can start to figure out, how do we do this? Because there's a better way for the community than war. This war is, everyone's going to lose, and the only way out. We could find. There was a Soviet general I once talked to, who said, I've seen a lot of wars, and I've noticed that almost every war ends in a negotiation. So why not start with a negotiation?
Yeah.
And we could. It may take years, or it could take months, or it could take weeks, but there's got to be some better way. There's going to be some better way out of this.
Well,
And
talking about negotiation, part of negotiation is listening. And there's a saying, it's a quote, I think, and I think I'm just going to read it so I get it right. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply.
that's it.
So, I mean, the third side, sure, we can all sit down and talk. But if we talk over each other, that's not going to happen, is it? So what would be your techniques for people, for our audience, but in general, to be a better listener?
Yeah, it's interesting because people, as a negotiation, people say it's always, people think negotiation is about talking. True negotiation is about listening, right? We talk about, there are peace talks. There actually should be peace listenings there on the border in Belarus. They need to listen to each other, right? Listening is hard because the way we normally listen is we listen to reply. We listen to refute. We listen to say, I don't agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
We listen from our perspective. And we have that part of our mind that's listening to the other side and saying, I don't agree with this, I don't agree with that, I don't agree with this. And you reply, right? Now, the kind of listening that's needed is listening where you put yourself in the other side's shoes, from their perspective. Like, that's the only kind of listening that's going to help and that listening can help you because what is negotiation? You're trying to influence the other side. You're trying to change their mind, right? How can you possibly change someone's mind unless you know where that mind is? And the only way you're going to know where that mind is by listening. So listening is maybe the most important thing in negotiation. And the other thing that listening does is, this is why I think listening is the cheapest concession you could make, because it costs you very little to listen. And it means everything to the other side because it's a sign of respect. It's a sign of saying, I respect you, I value you. I may disagree with you. I may disagree violently with you even, but I respect you. I see you as a human being. I respect you. And so to me, listening is the key. And the key to listening is just a little shift in the spotlight. Instead of putting the spotlight right here on our perspective, move the spotlight about 2 feet over to the other person and try to understand what it's like to be in their shoes. What is it like? I mean, it's really hard, like for someone like Putin right now, because there's so much anger against him and he's crazy and he's demented and everyone's like, no, but put yourself in his shoes. Imagine this boy growing up in Leningrad, right after 1 million people die, his brother dead, his mother, just the worst kind of poverty, freezing, all that, go through his thing. He becomes a judo guy. He becomes, it's all about power and force. He goes, his hero is KGB, who defends, like Richard Sorge, and he's trying to. He goes in East Germany. Then he watches the country that he was trying to, his country he's so proud of, dissolve. He sees people begging on the streets. He sees, the great power humiliated. So, then you can start to see, okay, now, how are we going to influence him? Because we need to influence him right now. He has all this power. We need to influence him and persuade him to stop what he's doing, to come to his senses. But it only begins by listening to him.
Do you think let's assume there are a lot of couples listening, and during the COVID pandemic, the lockdowns, a lot of couples spent a lot of time together 24/7 for maybe the first time in their lives because they weren't going to the office, working from home. But tensions can get quite high in situations like that. I think some couples get to the point where they're not listening to each other anymore, or the communications breaks down. In that type of situation, are there any words or phrases that they might remember to use to kind of bring them away from the cliff where things become so intractable?
Yes, I mean, you could say, let's just stop for a second, pause, on every device now you have the pause button, right? Pause. just because what happens is couples, and it's the same dynamics as with you. I mean, but to me, the same principles apply very much across the board here. But in with couples, and I can just speak from my own personal experience, we get reactive, right? We get reactive. We get into that left feeling part of the brain, just trying to protect. We feel threatened, right? And so the truth is, if you can pause for a moment and breathe, just even take a couple deep breaths, a little oxygen to, or take 5 minutes, even it takes 90 seconds for the biochemicals of anger and fear to process through your system. And after that, then you have a choice. You can, as I was saying before, you can go to the balcony, you can go to a place of perspective where you can ask yourself, what do I really want? There's a saying about marriage that either you can either be right or you can be happy, but you can't be both, right? And the thing is, what do I really want here? Do I want to be happy or do I want to be right? Which is more important here? And then you can make a choice and direct your behavior. But that ability to stop for a moment, because we just keep on going, but just stop for a moment, take a breath, do whatever you like to do. Go for a walk around the block, go for a walk in nature, go for a workout, breathe just for a moment, and then come back and ask yourself, what do I really want? What do I really want in this relationship? And then follow that. I think that's key. And then, the ability to go to the balcony, the ability to listen, and then, because so often in the conflicts, the question becomes, who's going to win? Who's going to win this fight? If you're asking the question, who's winning this marriage? Your marriage is in serious difficulty, right? So you got to ask the right question: is, what do I really want? And then put myself in the other person's shoes, the spouse's shoes. What do they really want? And then, when you really get to what they really want and what you really want, and they feel heard and respected, 9 times out of 10, you can find an easy solution that actually, we could do this, and we could make this work. And, and then remember the whole, remember the third side. The third side is the whole. It's like the side of the kids and the family and the wider community and your marriage and everything you have invested in it. And a better solution.
I have a question on the third side, since we're back at it. I need a clarification. The third side, is it always outside of a person, or you could find that within?
You're a really good question, Melissa. Yeah, the third side exists within us, because any of us can take the third side. The third side is just, it's the side of the whole, like the whole marriage, the whole family, the whole community. And we're all part of that, right? That we're all part of the third side. We're all third siders. Like, for example, I was mentioning Mandela. Mandela was a third side leader. He was clearly the leader of the African Nationalist Congress of the Black nationalists. But he made it really clear. He said in his trial, in fact, in the Rivonia trial, he said, I want to make very clear, I am fighting not just for the freedom of the Blacks, but for the freedom of the whites. I'm fighting for the freedom of everyone. So he had that strong third side in himself. There's a spirit actually in Africa called Ubuntu, which is what they used. Ubuntu means I exist because you exist. We exist. We're all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And so that's all within.
Right. So it's basically, it starts within.
That's what it starts within.
Okay.
Peace starts within. Mm-hmm. And maybe that may be one of the greatest lessons I've learned, I would say, in the last 45 years is I always thought, negotiations about trying to influence the other side, right? And you're dealing with difficult people, difficult leaders, and how do you deal with those difficult things? The most difficult person we ever have to deal with in our life, the person who gets most in our way of getting what we want, is right here. It's the person we look at in the mirror every day. So successful negotiation, getting to yes, begins with getting to yes with ourselves. Then once we get to yes with ourselves, it's going to be a lot easier to get to yes with others.
Wow. we had a couple of audience questions because we want to be respectful of your time before that, have you ever been called upon to mediate in a couples environment, or maybe even between a head of state and a first lady?
In a couples environment, for sure. Between a head of state and a first lady, well, I know heads of states and first ladies, but I don't think I've ever been called upon to mediate between them.
No, Donald
Even
Trump
if
and
you
Melania.
did, you wouldn't be able to.
Oh, no, not right now.
That's funny.
But I mean, one of the interesting things about this field is you can go into, you're in business between union and management. I've negotiated between coal miners and managers, husbands and wives, corporate battles, and then civil wars, and it's because it's all the same. We're all human beings. We all come into conflict, and the question is, how do we find a better way to arrive at solutions that work for us and work for the larger community as well?
I have a feeling if you were called up to Ottawa sooner, you might have played an instrumental role in helping Trudeau and the truckers solve their differences a lot sooner than it happened. That was a whole different conflict there too. This is from Dr. Sue Varma. She's also a previous guest. She's New York Langong and very well known. Today's Show and all these programs.
I'm having a lot of conversations with people about what is it going to take for the war to end, and it's something I'm thinking to myself. Does it take social media and media coverage for us to recognize that we're all pretty much the same, and if people are suffering in another part of the world that on a deep level it impacts us too? Is it going to take economic collapse of these countries, or for people or soldiers within the country to resist and say, I don't want to be a part of this war? This is not my war to fight.
I think it's actually all of the above. The environment, it's basically, how do you bring someone to their senses, right? And so economic pressure, we can already see it happening, dissent within Russia. The truth is that there are a number of ways this could go. It's not just, you can't make a prediction. There's 3 or 4 ways it could go. It could become a quagmire, where the Russian troops are there and occupation, and more like Afghanistan, and it's just endless battle. That's one way, but in the end it will have to be negotiated and they will have to leave. That's one way. Another is that that it escalate into something even worse. They could escalate into all-out war, which is unthinkable, but that unfortunately is a possibility. To me, the real question is whatever way it goes, and there are many different scenarios in which wars can go, in the end, it's going to be a negotiation. In the end, there's going to have to be a negotiation. So the earlier we can negotiate, the more we can come to our senses now, the more suffering we'll save. So the only question is just how many people are going to die before Mr. Putin, Russia, and all of us come to our senses and find a way out of this, which is clear. It's already there. We already have that experience. Europe had this experience after World War II. After World War I, they didn't learn, and they got World War II, right? And then they learned, and they said, oh, only by coming together. Germany and France were the worst enemies. They'd fought 3 wars in the previous 70 years. And now they're the closest of allies. So we know how to do this. Now we just have to do it again with Russia.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, which leads us to the last question. So it's from Diljan from New York. And he's just said, if we analyze the current situation, what are common factors between NATO and Russia, and how can those aspects play a role in negotiation for Ukraine?
Well, to me, the central, in negotiation, we have the zone of possible agreement. Where's the zone of possible agreement here? For Ukraine, for Russia, as I understand Russian interests as much as I can understand, the idea of a hostile military alliance Ukraine being part of that, Ukraine being part of NATO, so close to Moscow, on Moscow borders. For them, it's as if Canada in the United States were to go with the Warsaw Pact. You know, it's like, for us, it would be unthinkable, right?
Yeah.
Or Mexico. So to me, the zone of possible agreement is no one in NATO, no one in Europe says, you know, thinks Ukraine should be part of NATO. Russia doesn't want Ukraine part of NATO. Mr. Zelensky proposes neutrality. He said we can talk about neutrality and so on, you know, or whatever it looks like. But the zone of possible agreement where they can agree is, you know, is on something where there's a kind of security where everyone is secure, everyone is sovereign, and we can create a new European security architecture. That, to me, that's the zone of possible agreement, is we agree that Ukraine is not going to be a hostile military power. There's not going to be a hostile military power right on Russia's borders. We can all agree on that. Russia, you know, deserves its own security within the context of a European security guarantees that guarantees the sovereignty and independence of the people of Ukraine, who can, you know, make their own democratic decisions. So that's where the sweet spot is. And that's, from a negotiation point of view, is how do you construct that? How do you get there? And that takes a lot of diplomacy and a lot of negotiation, a lot of creativity and a lot of patience, but it can work.
Yeah. I think they need you.
Great. Well, yeah, that's what I say. I want to get this up as soon as possible. And who knows, maybe someone will listen to it in a position of influence and take a lot of your wisdom and apply it, because we sure do need more people like you in the world, William. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're really welcome, both of you. I enjoyed the conversation greatly, and I wish you well there in Ukraine. You're doing, that's part of the really important work. That's third side work, is really helping the world get informed about what's going on there, and you're right there on the spot there. And so stay well, stay safe, and continue to do the good work. And you too, Melissa.
Thank you very much.
It was lovely meeting you and having this conversation. I learned a lot. All right.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah, so once again, we wanted to thank William Ury for taking the time out of his very, very busy schedule and that beautiful environment he lives in to answer our questions and the audience questions. Thank you for submitting them. And we will post links to some of his work as well. Yes.
And we would like to also thank Pretty Bali, our assistant producer, who is in London. She's been a trooper. She's been not only helping Global Impact, but helping you, Michael, in Ukraine.
Yes.
She has been up in the middle of the night, she said, at 3 a.m. sometimes, trying to figure it out with you. So we want to send her like a big, big hug and a big thank you.
Absolutely. Big hug. Big thank you. Yeah. She keeps us really going. Yeah. And don't forget, of course, as we always ask you, to share, like, and subscribe. And, Melissa, I'd like to repeat a message that we've made so many times near the end of the show, is to, especially during these times when there's a lot of anxiety. I mean, we're getting, it seems, really past those punishing COVID lockdowns, but now we have this crisis, and I know a lot of people are anxious about it, is I pick up the phone or use the technology we have with us to reach out to somebody, even for a minute or two, because there are a lot of people in a kind of state of anxiety, or they're lonely right now. The world seems like a very unpredictable, shaky, and sometimes mean place. So it's really, really important that we leverage technology as best we can to brighten up someone's day. It can make a big, big difference.
Yes. And we would like to also send our prayers for everybody in Ukraine. From here, from the US, and I'm sure from the world. The entire world is with you, Ukraine. We are watching. You are in our prayers, and we just want to send you a love. And there's not much, obviously, we can do from where we are, but we're trying. And we will post a donation link under the episode for aid relief, to help Ukrainians who are struggling right now You know, Michael, you were mentioning earlier that a lot of them, they just don't have, they're trying to run, they don't have the basic necessities.
Yeah.
So we will post several links. If you want to donate for Ukraine, please do so. Ukraine needs it right now. All right, on that note, I think it's time to say goodbye and till the next episode. All right, take care, everyone.
For the next
Bye.
episode. Take care, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Bye-bye.